Currently, under Canadian animal welfare practices, dairy cattle are not required to have unconfined access to space on a daily basis year-round. We are here today to explain to you why this policy should be changed to allow dairy cattle access to unconfined spaces daily. Animal welfare is defined by how an animal is coping with the conditions in which it lives. Dairy cattle is in good state of welfare if, as indicated by scientific evidence, it is healthy, comfortable, well-nourished, safe, able to express innate behavior, and if not suffering from unpleasant states such as pain, fear, and distress. Allowing dairy cattle to have access to unconfined spaces on a daily basis has been indicated by scientific evidence that it will lead to better health physically and emotionally, which is an improved quality of life.
Dairy cattle are not hardy animals and are bred for milk production. Dairy cows such as Holsteins and Jerseys have a light coat and thin skin, so they cannot cope with extreme weather such as cold or wet conditions and heat in the summer months. Therefore, most dairy cattle are housed in freestall barns. Today, dairy farmers are implementing modern designs for their dairy barns and facilities to improve the comfort and welfare of their cattle. Because of the good care and quality feed that farmers provide, the cows today are producing 3 times the amount of milk they did in 1955. Dairy producers provide the best quality care for their cows and, depending on the conditions, give access to pasture or freestall barns when the cows are on their dry cycle, which is about 2 months long.
Cows at pasture lay for longer and with fewer interruptions than house cows. House cows also show more interruptions to their laying behavior than pasture cows. Restlessness combined with reduced laying times are indicators of lack of comfort, udder problems, or overcrowding in the housing facilities that lead to hoof disorders. An additional study also found that comfort in resting was significantly and positively influenced by grazing due to more comfortable lying conditions, for example, softer lying surfaces on pasture.
Dairy barns have come a long ways that are well designed. An area outside that concrete floors in some of the barns are coverall buildings that let all the sunlight in. Barns are kept very clean for the cattle, and many different products are used for the comfort of the cows, including bedding, rubber bedding, water, beds, and sand. Farmers already do everything they can for the well-being of the animal, because if the cows are happy and healthy, that means more milk production for them.
Summer mastitis is a major problem, especially in high traffic areas, which applies to dairy farms because of runways to pasture, outside water, and small pastures, which hold lots of cattle, because it makes easier and quicker to get the cows in. How do you deal with mastitis then?
Though mastitis can still occur using a grazing system, a number of studies have shown a significant decrease in a cow's risk of having mastitis when giving access to pasture. For example, a study involving 274 Dutch dairy herds indicated that cows given access to pasture at night had a lower incidence of clinical E. coli mastitis compared to those housed full-time.
A study done in 2018 examining the effects of housing systems found that access to pasture has been associated with reduced lameness of lock lesions. Lameness is a major animal welfare and productive challenge facing the dairy industry because of it causes pain, reduces DMI and milk yield, and increases the risk of cow being culled before the end of lactation. Due to the high prevalence of hoof problems and leg lesions found in cow housed within freestall housing across the globe, efforts have been focused on identifying alternative housing and management strategies, for example, allowing dairy cows to access unconfined spaces on a daily basis.
We do realize that unconfined access is good for the dairy animals, but they already do when they can. According to the Canadian regulation, dairy cattle are recommended to have access to pasture or exercise yards, which are often in dairy barns, which already decrease labor and bedding requirements. Dairy producers want nothing but the best for their cows because decrease in milk and lameness is loss of profit. Most producers already give access for cows when they can, but how is it possible and humane for dairy cows to be put outside during the winter months when it's minus 30? Indoors is climate controlled.
You state that hoof and leg lesions are higher prevailing in dairy cattle that are housed inside. This and much worse can be just as prevalent outside, as there is a certain unpredictability of housing cattle outside, and it is shown through these uncontrollable sources such as predators, disease, pests, and weather. How do you control these dangers in an uncontrollable setting?
Oh, that's a lot to read. Yeah. Yeah, I think so. Like all grazing livestock, dairy cows need protection from predators. It should be the farm manager's job to learn the ecology and habits of the surrounding area's wildlife, to time calving and lambing to avoid predation risk, and schedule pasture when predation is normally low. Proper fencing and shelters, making frequent unpredictable patrols in pastures, and guardian animals like dogs are other ways to keep predation loss low and keep dairy cattle safe.
A scientific study done in 2000 found that when cows are given the choice between being indoors or outdoors, cows spend most of their time outdoors. When given a choice between lying indoors or outdoors, they mostly lay in pasture. If they have the opportunity to forage indoors or outdoors, they spend most of their time grazing. Studies show that they prefer shade from trees rather than indoor shelter as well.
Confined cattle but had a healthier rumen versus the grazing cattle. Total mixed rations have the nutritional advantage over other types of feeding systems in that fiber and non-fiber rations components are delivered in uniform proportions throughout the feeding period. This minimizes the fluctuation in rumen pH and promotes healthy rumen conditions, even at relatively high rates of energy intake. From a nutritional standpoint, the three major challenges of pasture-based dairy systems are maintaining favorable rumen fermentation conditions, maintaining adequate dry intake, and meeting energy and protein requirements. With dairy farms increasing up to 3,500 cows in Canada, with high robotic reliance already, how is it possible to give all the cows access to pasture all year round each day? The land mass to support that number of cows would be tremendous, and soon be far from the barns for the cows to walk, because they already have to be milked 2 to 3 times a day.
The pasture is a natural environment for cattle. It allows the expression of normal behavior and provides ample, comfortable lying space and the opportunity to lie in stretched positions. As well, pasture-based feeding provides the foundation of dairy cows' diet. Animal welfare is important, therefore the dairy cattle must be comfortable and able to express innate behavior. This means they need to have access to unconfined spaces like pasture on a daily basis because a barn is an unnatural environment.
With the dairy industry, there's being many improvements, which includes exercise pens, which allow access for cattle to such spaces that are not confined. But also, there's a higher avoidance rate with cows that are grazed due to less contact with humans, and the avoidance distance is often associated with well-beings of the animal. The smaller the distance, the welfare of the animal is thought to be better, and vice versa with a larger avoidance distance. You state that pasture grazing is the foundation for a dairy cattle's diet. Managing rumen health and dietary fiber adequately can be challenging with pasture-based systems. Lush, rapidly growing pastures have low NDF concentration. Thus, rumen fermentation conditions, particularly pH, may be a problem, and rumen fermentation is when a large portion of the food is turned into nutrition and energy for the animal. With such favorable feeding conditions with house cattle, why allow cattle to feed out in pasture when there's quite often subpar grazing conditions?
Dairy cows cannot consume grass alone. Lactating cows have high metabolisms. The farmer has to have proper pasture management by rotating pastures so overgrazing doesn't occur. As well, feed the cows hay and silage daily. When having them frequently, you get better DMI. Grazing is beneficial to dairy cows, and when done correctly can improve cow health as well dairy finances. We agree with the article by Progressive Dairyman when they say obtaining the maximum DMI from pasture and supplementing for energy allows producers to make the most of their resources with the least amount of labor and still keep production high.
When cows are kept indoors for several months during the winter, the positive effects of previous access to pasture are likely to carry over to the beginning of the indoor period, because welfare problems generally take some time to develop. A study in 2017 assessed 10 herds at both the beginning and the end of the same indoor period. Assessment at the end of the period resulted in a higher prevalence of the following welfare measures: severely lame cows, mild integument alterations, cough per cow, diarrhea, and vulvar discharge. In addition, the mortality rate was much higher than the qualitative behavior assessment score was worse. This confirms the carryover of positive effects of access to unconfined spaces like pasture.
You say that the dairy cattle prefer to be kept outdoors rather than being fed forage indoors. This, however, drastically lowers the quality of their food intake, which in turn lowers their health and milk production. In a study we found that conducted in Canada by the University of British Columbia, 25 late lactation cows had free access to freestall barns or to an adjacent pasture. The result actually showed that cows prefer both depending on environmental conditions and the time of day, meaning cows don't want to be outside all day, year round, and do like being inside of the harsh environments. They like a routine.
So last question.
Sure. Holsteins and Jersey cows have little hair and thin skin. They are not a tough animal, and the elements in their environment are hard on them. Most times of the year it is too hot, too cold, rainy and muddy, or too many bugs to let them outside. With unconfined access to pasture all year round, it can be hard on dairy cattle as they are not necessarily as hardy as a beef cattle.
Providing shelter and ensuring good body condition will help mitigate the effects of winter weather. Higher wind speeds partially destroy the insulin of the hair coat and increase convection heat loss. The use of windbreakers in grazed fields can significantly reduce the effects of high wind velocity by minimizing these losses and hence reducing the use of energy reserves. Ultimately, the choices system that a farmer adopts will be influenced by personal choices, preferences, individual farm circumstances, by the cost of inputs relative to the value of outputs, and by government policy and legislation. With regards to the latter, environmental constraints are likely to become increasingly stringent, especially in relation to climate change and weather quality. In addition, consumer choice and perception are becoming increasingly important.
In closing, we believe that the necessity for unconfined space access for dairy cows is not as wholesome as some believe. The unpredictability and dangers that can arise could put the animal and the farmer's profit at risk. We see farmers are taking steps to combat that risk by keeping dairy cattle confined, thus allowing them comforts such as highly nutritious feed, water, and comfortable bedding, all under a watchful eye to make sure animal health is at the forefront. All along with an industry that is ever evolving, the comfort of confined dairy cattle is always being improved, as dairy producers always have the animal's best interest in mind, as a healthy animal is a more profitable animal.